Well, hello, everyone. I'm William Bezmen, talking to you live from Pathways to Health. And Judith and I are very excited to share some information with you that some of our listeners may be interested in. Of course, Pathways to Health, we use an integrative approach to healing. And mainly around our hypnosynergistic approach, which is a combination of energy work, spirituality, working with the deeper mind, psychotherapy, and aspects of shamanism and so forth, stuff that we have put together. And it's not the main focus today, but it's something that we'll talk about in the future. And I presented that at the American Board of Hypnotherapy in 1995. And since that time, we've been when we opened Pathways in 1996, we used that as the main course of our healing and treatment. Of course, opening up to spirit, and when we talk about healing, we believe healing comes from spirit. But we'd like to share something with you that has to do with self-empowerment and a way of reclaiming your health through a drugless method of self-correction. In other words, our body would correct itself. Now, many of you have heard of biofeedback, and it's an excellent form of self-regulation and dealing with your body's anxiety and tension levels, lowering blood pressure, thinking more clearly, expressing yourself more easily, and so forth. And of course, my belief is biofeedback is a form of self-hypnosis, but it's just monitored. And that's great. And it's a wonderful modality to add into the mix of, and again, why we call ourselves Pathways to Health, because we believe that there are many pathways to enlightenment, pathways up the mountain that travel up. People can enter their path, on their path from many different directions. But we believe that as it gets closer and closer up towards the top of the mountains, it becomes more and more similar. And of course, our similarity of what we feel has to do with spirit and opening up to the divine light and love of the universe. But what I want to share with you is something that has tremendous effect, and it's really been going on for over 40 years. Research that was done in the Mayo Clinic, Harvard Medical School, and Stanford University. And it works with conditions, or it helps people address symptoms of ADHD, anxiety, autism, depression, insomnia, memory loss, migraines, or just overall increasing personal performance. And it's a technology called Neuro biofeedback or NeuroFeedback. So the difference is biofeedback is working with your mind to control your body. Neurofeedback is working so that the brain can correct dysregularities in its performance. So let's talk a little bit about that. An example can be like here at Pathways, we look at the brain and our bodies and compare them to a computer. The software on the computer is what we deal with when you change your thinking, when you empower yourself, you release blocks and so forth. You're enhancing the software of the computer. But in neurofeedback, you're actually working with the hardware, the brain in itself. And what they talk about with neurofeedback, and I have some notes here, so I will be referring to the notes. It's a way of changing the brain through a process they call neuroplasticity. And it's the brain's ability to create new neural pathways. Now, for many years, we talked about when I first got involved with working with the deeper mind in 1976, we would talk about tapes that were playing over and over again, the tapes of limiting thoughts and beliefs. And then as technology changed, they became different types of tapes and recordings, and then the CDs, and now it's really streaming. But it's looking at some negative programming, basically, that would repeat over and over again. So making change has been challenging. And now they've discovered that these CDs that we used to call them were really neural pathways of the brain. They're deep grooves that have been through repetition or through trauma, certain beliefs and our emotions are trapped into these recordings or these tracks that are in the brain. They've discovered that now. The science has been expanding and greater technology coming along. So the things that we've talked about, we labeled it a little differently, and now it's about the neural pathways. But there's a process called neuroplasticity, and it's the brain's ability to create these new neural pathways. And how it does it is fascinating. But let me talk a little bit about a healthy functioning brain. There's basically four distinct brain waves that we function with, that we're most familiar with. Beta is the brainwave that we're active. It should be more activated when we're alert, when we're thinking, take an exam possibly. The alpha waves are the waves that come from the right brain that should be stimulated when we start to relax, when we start to go into a meditative state. We start to imagine, start to use visualization or imagery. As we start moving in that direction, the alpha brainwave patterns should be more powerful and more stimulated. Then, if you actually go deeper into that through like deep hypnotic processes or deep thought, or as you're starting to fall asleep, the theta waves become more pronounced and more powerful. And then, of course, delta are the waves that show up if we've been monitoring them as we're sleeping. Now, typically, we should be flowing between those four different dominant brain waves through the course of the day, whatever's going on in our life at a particular time. However, occasionally, or more often than we think, the research has shown that in any given circumstances, there are expected ranges of brainwave patterns that change. When they're functioning, quote, normally, compared to the whole, through the larger database that they experience it through, or they compare it to, we have a balance between this functioning. But through things like even subluxations, things like genetics, trauma, increased stress, being on certain types of medication, or certainly drugs or alcohol, these brainwave patterns can be dysregulated, resulting in different types of neurological conditions. So if they're producing a higher range of alpha, for instance, the patient can experience symptoms associated with fibromyalgia, pain, irritability, things like that. The brain's higher than normal magnitudes of beta waves, the patient experiences symptoms associated with anxiety, panic attacks, migraines, tension headaches, chronic pain, or insomnia. So with these conditions, this is what is discovered through brain mapping, or what's called QEEGs, qualitative electroencephalograms. So what happens with this neurofeedback, what we do is, or what's done, is they first do a brain mapping. QEEG to monitor 13 points of the brain. One is a ground, and the other 12 points of the brain, to see if there are any of these global dysregulations between the alpha, the beta, the alpha, the theta, and the delta states that should be flowing in a healthy manner normally. If we find that there's something out of balance, that shows up on the QEEG or that brain mapping. So this is real science. And then it also picks out those 12 different points, and each of those points has a different function within the brain. So if something is underproducing, it'll create certain effects. And if it's overproducing, it'll create another effect of being off balance. So how do you correct this? So what does neural pathways do? Well, it's an amazing how you how do you correct these neural pathways. It's amazing through the technology that they have that used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment that only these major universities or medical centers could afford. But now it's able to be offered to the average public, and it's quite exciting. What's done is pretty fascinating, and I think you guys will get a kick out of it. So after the brain mapping, this evaluation and reporting is sent out to an extensive database, and it comes back with a particular protocol that would work best for this individual. So it's specific to each individual that gets evaluated. And how does it change? So you've got to be thinking, well, how do we change that? How do we change that brain's dysregulation? Well, we don't. The brain does it itself, but some of the means and the ways that it comes about is quite fascinating. And what happens is, for instance, once it's all established, then they start to work with one or two of the points that of those 12 that are monitored and evaluated that need the most work. And as we monitor that, or as it is monitored, it goes through this computer system. And then the individual, it just simply has maybe one or two wires on their head, something to their ears. And this is just observing the brain. Now, we would run this through, let's say, a Netflix, and the person can watch any particular movie that they're interested in. And the movie would go through this system. Now, or it could be a game, for instance, or a number of games that people can use. It's anything that would be of interest to the individual and therefore the brain. So as the brain is functioning, and if it goes into that imbalance, then the movie that you're watching gets dimmer, and they're listening to it with earphones, and the sound gets lower. But now what happens? Well, if it's something that the person is interested in, the brain always wants to correct itself. It always wants to complete things. We're the ones who interfere in it if we don't accomplish the goals that we set, right? But the brain always wants to do this if it's functioning properly. So what happens is you're watching the movie, or the client is watching a movie, and it gets dimmer, it's lower, and all of a sudden the brain automatically corrects itself. And there's an instant feedback. That's what neurofeedback is. Instant feedback to the brain that whatever it just did is working. And the movie continues to play. Then, of course, if this is something that's been a problem for someone, shortly after, a few 10, 15 seconds later, or even shorter at times, it will dysregulate again, and then the brain has to make the correction. So the person who is monitoring this but the client is looking at this at another screen and they can see these regulations. The client is experiencing it because something that they're interested in is changing, and the correction takes place automatically. So as the brain starts to get used to that correction and the immediate feedback, it's getting stronger, it's getting more powerful. Just like if you were working out with a muscle, you start off with very low weights, and then as you get to master them, then you increase the weight. Well, the mechanism actually regulates itself so that as the client is becoming more and more successful at a more, let's say, easy to attain result, then it automatically ups the game a little bit. And then the brain has to get a little bit smarter, a little bit stronger, a little bit more powerful to correct it. And over a period of time, throughout, let's say, a 20-minute to 30-minute session, this has happened many times, and the brain is learning how to correct itself. And then with repetition through other visits, the client and the brain start to learn how to master this over and over again. So it's so exciting, the results, because this retraining of the brain, or the neuroplasticity, that its ability for the brain to heal itself from traumas, things like post-traumatic stress that have traumatized people, that they've experienced some trauma from a car accident, some type of emotional pain or physical pain or humiliation, embarrassment, whatever the case may be. It's one of the things that we do specialize here in is traumatic stress at Pathways. But this is also more technology that helps us to identify any brainwave patterns that have been affected by these traumas, or this intense anxiety or apprehension and so forth. So we just wanted to give you a little overview of it, a little quick introduction about this type of technology that's available out in our world now. It's Neuro biofeedback, or NeuroFeedback, and it's technology that helps each individual to have their brain correct itself so that it's functioning more effectively or efficiently. And there's whole programs for people who just want to improve their performance, whether it's in sports or test taking or school or concentration, whatever, that helping the brain get to optimum performance. Just something here at Pathways we want to introduce to you. It's part of our goal to share different types of healing and treatment that's available to the public. And if anyone who lives locally to us, we're in Mount Sinai, New York, we are doing a free overview on Tuesday evening, tomorrow night, at 7 p.m. So if anyone's interested in seeing this and come in more detail and be able to answer all your questions, call us at Pathways to Health, 631-642-2200. That's 631-642-2200 to register for just the overview and more in-depth understanding of this thing called NeuroFeedback that can help many people make some changes in their life that they've wanted to do. Or email us at info@pathwaystohealth.com. We ask that you register either by phone or by email. If you're interested in just coming for an overview, maybe it takes an hour, and we could get into more detail with it and so forth. But as far as all of our followers, just another exciting thing that is happening throughout our world, and more people are awakening to this and having incredible benefits in changing their lives. So from Pathways to Health, I am William Bezmen, one of the co-directors and owners, and on behalf of my wife, Judith Grant, we thank you for joining us. And if you found this interesting, share it with your friends and family, and many blessings to all of you. So thank you for joining us, and would love to have all of you have a great and glorious day, and actually life. So once again, I'm William Bezmen. Thank you for joining us.